So, Liz, I didn't tell you in the questions, if you could just introduce yourself and tell how long you've been teaching and that kind of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Liz Lebedda, and I have been teaching for 6 years in a Baltimore City school called Bremsling Public Charter, and they're located in Northeast Baltimore City.
Okay, thank you. And Liz is currently in our graduate program for reading specialist. So one question I wanted to ask you about is, how do you set up your groups for guided reading?
Okay, so after I do beginning of year testing, I take a look at where all of my students are, and I spend some time making groups. I like to keep them between 4 and 6 students. 6 is kind of too big, so 4 to 5 is like my sweet spot, and I would say that's probably the easiest to manage with a guided reading group too. And so obviously classrooms are never perfect, so I have a wide range of students, and so the way I group them is I first group them based on their reading level. And so that might mean that I only have 2 kids who are at a level B, for example, and 2 that are at a level D. Well, I don't want a group that just has 2 students in it necessarily, so I'll look and see if I can move some students based on what I know about their reading. For example, if they're good at reading comprehension, I might move them into a higher group, or if they need some more work on decoding, I might keep them in a lower group. So it's really just dependent on the classroom and the data.
Okay, so what are 3 things that you always do in your guided reading groups?
So I always start out with some sort of phonics or word work. For lower grade students, you're going to want to hit sight words. It's a great time to practice some sight words. And then if they're a higher reading group or older students, I always do some sort of vocabulary work or some work with like suffixes and prefixes and roots and stuff like that. So that's number 1. And then number 2, I pick a skill that I want to focus on. And this is where like getting to know your students really comes in handy, and where they're weak and where they're strong. So I pick a reading comprehension skill and then a text that pairs well with the skill I'm trying to teach. And then we'll spend about 10 to 13 minutes on that reading and then working on the skill. And then the third thing I always do is some sort of writing at the end, whether it's a graphic organizer or a sentence or a couple of sentences. And it usually relates back to the comprehension skill.
So what do the other children do while you are doing reading groups?
Again, that depends on what grade level you're at, but I follow a loose model of the daily 5. And so I do, when I taught 2nd grade, we did independent reading, some sort of writing, and some sort of word work. And so the students would have like their assignments at the beginning of the week, and they would have to complete all the assignments by Friday. And so they kind of got to choose how they wanted to do it, when they wanted to do it, as long as they were finished by the end of the week. And then with older students, since they're reading novels and you want to help foster their reading comprehension, we do novel studies and literature circles. And so while they're not with me in group, they're responsible for reading a couple chapters a day. And depending on their day, they either spend some time independently responding in their journal to like a set of questions, or they're meeting with their group and discussing those questions with each other.
Okay. What would you tell first-year teachers about the structure of guided reading?
So guided reading lessons are very short and very quick. They're 20 minutes long, and you don't have a lot of time usually in the day built in for guided reading. At my school, we have about 40 to 50 minutes for guided reading groups, so I usually can fit in 2 groups a day. And I would just say, like, make sure that your timing is on point. When I first started guided reading, I followed the Jan Richardson model. loosely now that I have older kids, but it was very structured. Like you spend 5 minutes on phonics and word work, and then you spend about 13 minutes on the reading and the reading comprehension skill, and then a couple of minutes at the end to finish it off with the writing. So just making sure that you stick to that. I used a timer to make sure that I stayed on track until I got used to the flow and the structure of the guided reading lesson. And then I would just say, like, as far as the structure of your classroom, because you also have to consider that, making sure that you build in those routines in the first month of school. The biggest thing I think is having kids work independently. That's the hardest part because you are in a group, so you can't monitor them all the time. So making sure that they have reading stamina, making sure that they understand your expectations, not only in your group, but then outside of your group. That way everything kind of flows as smoothly as possible.
There was something I was thinking of as you were talking, and I'm trying to remember. I should have written it down, but oh, I know. How often do you meet with each group? So if you only have 40 minutes, you can't meet with every kid every day, right?
Right. So I do a rotation schedule, and I meet with my 2 lowest groups the most because they need the most help with their reading comprehension. So I meet with them about like 3 times a week. And then I meet with my higher groups like about 2 to 1 time a week. My highest group doesn't really need me too much. I'll join in with their literature circle every now and then just to make sure everything's going okay, and I'll check in with them. But I really try to hit my lowest groups more often than my other groups.
Okay. Okay, so I think there's just one other question I wanted to ask, and that is when you're in the guided reading group and the kids are all reading, how do you structure that?
So I have each kid whisper read, and as they get older, I let them read silently in their heads while I'm listening to one student at a time. If they're all whisper reading, I don't mind, and they don't actually listen to each other. And so I'll just tap on one of them, like their desk or their book, and they know to raise their voice so I can hear them read.
Okay, so they're all reading that independently.
Yeah, so you might have a student finish the book before the other students in the group, and so I always tell them to just reread the book until the time is kind of done, and then we're ready to talk about it.
Okay. And I said that was the last question, but it brought up one other thing that I'm curious about. When you're in the guided reading, are you doing the same books that they're using for their literature circles, or are you looking at different, more structured reading there?
We're looking at more structured reading. When they're in their literature circles, they're reading a novel, and so they're focusing on lots of different skills. But if I'm noticing that they still need help, for example, with like cause and effect, I might pick a book that's specific to like cause and effect relationships, just so that they can get that isolated skill exposure.
Okay. So Liz, I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your busy day to do this for me. I'm going to turn off the recording.